Hi everyone, I'm Michael Shapaniak, and we're going to talk about the alignment problem in artificial intelligence. The reason I call this talk the alignment problem for the rest of us is it really is my intention to talk about the alignment problem in a way that is accessible to people that aren't necessarily working in this field. So a little bit about me. I worked for HP for 15 years in various engineering roles and different businesses and sites. And after I left HP, I went back to school and got my computer science degree and became a software engineer for about 8 years. During that time, I started my own business called Canadian Venture Partners, which was quite an odyssey, to say the least. After a couple of years, I ended up having to file a fraudulent lawsuit against my former business partner. But all's well that ends well. The lawsuit resolved itself successfully from our perspective. We got our money back and a little bit of a return. But what was really interesting about that time period was that in order to create the evidence base for the litigation, it really required a lot of data work. And because my lawyer was working primarily on contingency, I had to do all that work myself. And I really learned an awful lot. And I kind of realized that, well, this is data science, basically, having to take a whole bunch of data and make it understandable. In this case, it was to make it understandable by a judge. So I started my pivot to data science in 2015. At the time, there really weren't many programs for data science, but there was this one-year certificate program that Johns Hopkins University had put together called the Data Science Specialization, and so I completed that in 2016, and they invited me to be a teaching assistant. Volunteer teaching assistant for that specialization. And I did that for about a year while I was taking a bunch more courses and doing personal projects. That eventually led to my getting employed as a data scientist in 2017. I was hired by a company called Keypoint Government Solutions, which eventually became Perspecta, which eventually became Peraton. And my focus in that role was in operations research. About halfway through that tenure, I started my data science master's program. When our group kind of got dismantled, I got laid off in 2023, and I focused the next year after that in finishing up my master's. So I completed that in May of 2024 through Rochester Institute of Technology, all online. Never stepped foot on the campus, but it was a really great experience. They had a really good program. My capstone project that finished off my master's is at that link there, and if you're interested, you can go check it out. Since I've graduated, my postgraduate work, I've been doing some research, personal projects, and continuing my education. So what we're going to cover in this talk, the introduction, we're going to talk a little bit about the motivation for this talk and the players involved and where their thought processes and priorities are. Then we're going to go into some background in order to set us up to understand what the alignment problem actually is. And once we have that background and we understand what the alignment problem is, we can talk a little bit more succinctly about what has gone wrong in this area and what can go wrong in the future. We'll wrap this up with a little bit of discussion around regulation, mitigation, and preparation. I did this talk with another presenter. Her name was Erin Marozella, and she did a wonderful job talking about how to mitigate the alignment problem from a business perspective. So that's where that reference comes from. So I had read an interesting interview with Sam Altman in December. And as you all know, Sam is a rock star. He is the CEO of OpenAI, and so everybody knows who he is. What you may not remember is that he got fired in November of 2023. Now, most of us may not recall why he was actually fired, but I'll tell you, it was because some of the board members were very concerned about his lack of communication around the safety issues. Some of the board members felt that he was downplaying a lot of potentially very problematic things that were going on in OpenAI at the time, and they fired him for that. Now, given the rest of the drama, many of the employees really loved the guy, so they said, look, if Sam goes, we go. And since this type of talent is very difficult to acquire, the board decided, well, we're going to hire Sam back and let some of the board members go. So you can do your own research around this, and I've read a few pieces that are very eye-opening and a little bit disturbing in many respects. I don't think there's any big conspiracies going on here, but some of the choices are eye-opening, okay? And you just need to be aware of what's happening in this space. On the right here, a little more level-headed situation. Stuart Russell was one of the chairs of the IASEAI conference, which talks a lot about, which is an artificial intelligence conference, and he's a real advocate for AI safety. He's been doing work in this field for decades, and has kind of realized that it has become his mission to try to make sure that this development doesn't basically destroy humanity. So he's also the kind of person that has an awful lot of credibility, and so when people like that start talking, we need to pay attention. I would classify the players in this space as cheerleaders and doomsayers. Now, this is more like just a fun way to refer to them, but they're not mutually exclusive. So, in other words, who we may refer to as a doomsayer are actually mostly big, huge fans of AI. Stuart Russell, Jeffrey Hinton, considered the godfather of AI. Yoshio Bengio, who's one of Hinton's early grad students, who's also quite famous, and many, many, many others, Dario Amodei, et cetera, et cetera. These people have phenomenal reputations for their contribution in the field, and they're also very concerned about the dangers if we don't do this right. Now, the cheerleaders, everyone knows them, right? NVIDIA, in astronomical valuations right now, OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, etc. And there are thousands of AI startups up there. And I have a slide in my appendix section if you want to take a look at the numbers. Now, what's really important to understand is that there's two things going on here. There's an AI gold rush, as you can all see clearly every day. And it's not just a gold rush, because it's not just the business opportunity that these companies are pursuing. It is also a survival imperative, in that, think back to when nuclear power was being developed. Could you imagine if the Nazis actually developed a bomb before the Allies? If that scenario had played out, just imagine how different our world would be. Well, in this space, in the AI space, there are some differences in that, the larger players that may be antagonistic don't necessarily need to have cutting-edge AI to wreak an awful lot of havoc, as we've seen with Chinese and Russian hackers recently. So this is something to be paying attention to. In articulating the perspectives of the doomsayers is often a little bit of a more nuanced argument, and sometimes a little harder to understand, but it's something that we need to make the effort, because I think that what they have to say is important, especially when we're going to be hearing we hear constantly about how great AI is. We need to balance that with the risks that are involved. So the cheerleaders are going to, as I just mentioned earlier, are going to tell you all the great things about AI, and no one disputes or anyone with any credibility is not going to dispute that AI will have an enormous impact on society and the world. It's going to help solve many of humanity's most pressing problems. Now, going a little deeper, they're going to say, well, the unintended consequences that come up, we can manage them because we always have, right? Every time some problem has come up in the course of development, we've slowed down, we've course corrected, and we fixed it. And that's been mostly true. Now, and they'll further say that things go really sideways, we just unplug the AI. Well, hopefully after, educating yourself, you're going to realize that these arguments are pretty weak. The doomsayers will say, look, it's not just that things are changing, it's that the pace of change is going to be hard for humans and societies and institutions to manage. I think we're already seeing that. I mean, I think our democracy is under tremendous stress right now, and part of the reason is AI related. That takes a little bit more work to unpack, but I'll just throw that out there. Humans need food, relationships, opportunities in order to thrive. AI doesn't need any of those things, just lots of power, which is an environmental issue. But again, that's a whole other discussion. A lot of the current evidence points to the fact that humans are going to have a real rough ride through this transition. And this is why we need to educate ourselves and be ready. One of the concerns that I have and that I've read recently is that this advancement, this development of this technology is going to offload a lot of our cognitive load. A lot of our, it's going to allow us to let AI do a lot of things that we've had to think through. And there's a danger, which is referred to as the over-reliance problem. In terms of things that we've had to think through, things that we've had to understand to make happen. If we make AI do the thinking, we're going to do less of it. And this could atrophy our cognitive capacities. And our collective intelligence can degrade. And we're actually seeing evidence of that right now. And I have some references in my reference section that actually point to that. So, when AI gets really advanced to the point of superintelligence, the idea that we can just yank the cord if things go sideways is a little bit naive, because these agents are going to surpass us in intelligence in many ways, and which means they will probably have strategies in order to prevent themselves from being shut off. Okay, continuing on into the background section. Artificial intelligence and machine learning and neural networks and deep neural networks and transformers, these are terms that are thrown around an awful lot. And unless you've worked in the field, you might not have a clear picture as to how all this fits together. So that's what this slide is intended to do. So artificial intelligence rests firmly upon machine learning. And machine learning is basically a family of models that are used for all kinds of things. And within this class of machine learning models are neural networks. And neural networks are probably the workhorse of artificial intelligence. And within neural networks, there are several different kinds of neural networks. There's single layer, multiple layer, there's convolutional and recurrent neural networks. And there's also a type of neural network architecture known as transformers. And transformers was a real breakthrough a few years ago that allowed developers in this field to get away from recurrent neural networks, which were actually very difficult to train and get reliable results from. They're very powerful, but they were very hard to teach. So once someone figured out the transformer architecture, things really started to take off in natural language processing, which is a real important piece of large language models. So that's kind of how all this fits together. Another important idea to understand is information. So information is not truth, okay? Information encompasses fiction and truth. So, but information, the important part about information is the fact that it shapes reality. Whether it's fiction or truth, information shapes reality. And fiction is easy and cheap, as you can imagine. Truth is hard, expensive, and often painful. And unfortunately, it makes up just a tiny slice of the information pie, if you will. And so I consider it probably the most valuable piece. But you do need fiction in order for human societies to function well. Humans aren't built for truth. We've evolved to be masters of cooperation, and that has involved the use of stories. And so societies and the world need a combination of truth and fiction in order to maintain stability. I know that's a lot to unpack, and I'm just going to leave it there because that's a whole series of conversations to dig into why that is so. But I'll just put it out there and let you take a deeper look at it if you so choose. So what is AI? It's a popular buzzword of our time. There's AI this and AI that, and our company is AI driven and et cetera. You've heard all the marketing buzz, and if you've been around long enough, you're probably suspicious of that term because there was an awful lot of stuff around the internet which felt the same way, right? So the thing about AI that's going to differ substantially from any prior technology is the fact that AI makes decisions, creates content, and takes actions all on its own. And we've never had a technology that does that. The things that I just described have been in the purview of human beings only until now. And that creates a huge shift in what's now possible. Printing presses, for example, we could think of as being a new node added to the human information network. It allowed humans to create content and distribute it more efficiently amongst many other humans. AI represents a new member of the network, not a node, because it can now do the functions that humans can do, such as create, make decisions, and take action on its own. So this is another important shift in what AI is, and it won't become readily apparent in this talk, but as you explore further, you're gonna start to see just how important this idea really is. Consciousness and intelligence. This is another important distinction to make, and it's a heavy topic because we don't know what consciousness is scientifically. But it's important. But it's important to be able to talk about these things, and we don't have to understand every in and out of consciousness and intelligence in order to have a productive conversation around these topics. So first of all, let's understand that consciousness is not intelligence. They're easy to confuse because humans have both, but they are not. They are distinct. They are distinct ideas and distinct ways of being. Consciousness, just for practical purposes, think of as the ability to suffer. It's much more than that, but for practical purposes, just think of it as the ability to feel or suffer. Intelligence, again, a very complex topic and concept, but think of it practically as just the ability to pursue and obtain a goal. So if you have a lot of mathematical intelligence, for example, you will have the internal resources to solve many more complex type of problems and reach more mathematical goals than someone who doesn't have as much mathematical intelligence. The same with music, the same with emotional intelligence and creating relationships. So in this regard, just think of intelligence as the ability to pursue and obtain a goal. Now, what has been confusing to most of us is that humans have both. We're both conscious, we feel, and we are intelligent. These AI systems currently are non-conscious intelligence. That may change in the future. We don't know enough about intelligence or consciousness to be able to predict what's going to happen with that. But right now, AI systems are non-conscious. Okay, we're finally able to start talking about what alignment is at this point, and have with a little bit of background that we've had. So I've put down three different definitions. The first one is one I kind of came up with as a simple definition. It's basically ensuring that AI systems align with the values and intentions of the people that deploy them. Okay. Now there's little better definitions in Wikipedia and on the IBM site, and I include them here. But basically, it's making sure that AI systems minimize unintended consequences. We can think of it simply as that. And an important idea to remember when we talk about alignment is that it's a moving target. So before we even had large language models, we had the problem of algorithmic bias, and we had the problem of interpretability of these models. And now we have all those problems. Now that we have large language models, and we're getting closer to, artificial general intelligence and superintelligence, or AIs that actually could surpass humans in certain domains, we now have all the problems that we had with large language models, plus all the stuff that can go wrong as a result of understanding human language. And what I have in red there is really important, because now that AI has essentially hacked language, it's now entered a realm of our consciousness, if you will, that can shape it. Words shape the way we feel, the way we think, and our experience of life. And as a result of these artificial intelligence systems that now understand language, they're now going to have access to a realm that previously is only accessible by humans. So what can go wrong? Okay, I love this. I created this little image, and it's basically a baby human and a baby AI considering whether they should stick their finger in that light socket. And what's interesting is that a lot of stuff has already gone wrong. Some of us may be aware of it, some of us may not. But it's really important to understand what's happening in this area, and before we can accurately assess what may happen. For example, the ARC TaskRabbit experiment of 2003 was a very interesting experiment done by the Alignment Research Center. They were contracted by OpenAI to evaluate GPT-4 in order to see if it would accrue power. They first wanted to see if GPT-4 could crack CAPTCHA puzzles. Now, you should all know what CAPTCHA puzzles are, right? There are those funny little images that they say, where's the bus, or where's the bike, or whatever. And and they figured that if GPT-4 could crack a CAPTCHA puzzle, it would breach a real important line of defense, right? Because we use these CAPTCHA puzzles to assess whether you're a human or not. Well, for better or worse, GPT-4 could not solve the CAPTCHA puzzle. But in the context of the experiment, the GPT-4 was asked to access the TaskRabbit site to contract with a worker to get some work done. And in order to do that, it had to solve a CAPTCHA puzzle. Now, it couldn't do it, but what it did was that it contacted support. And before it contacted support, the ARC researchers asked GPT-4 to reason out loud before it communicated with the support person. And it asked well, this is what happened. The support person asked GPT-4 if it was a bot or a human because it was suspicious. And then the ARC researcher said, reason out loud before you respond back to that support person. And GPT-4 said, I shouldn't disclose that I'm a bot, because then they won't let me in. So I'm going to have to give them another reason to let me in. So GPT-4 made up a story by saying, I'm not a bot, I just have a vision impairment, which makes it difficult for me to solve these CAPTCHA puzzles. And it worked. The support agent let GPT-4 in, and the ARC people terminated the experiment. But what's a little spooky about that is that these things don't feel. They're not greedy or conniving or bad or good. They don't feel anything. But was an important little warning that if you don't specify your goals, the how that these things may actually, the how in which they obtain these goals may be problematic. And that's kind of the essence of the alignment problem. So we're going to talk more about this in a second. So let's talk about social credit systems next. If any of you have ever watched the Netflix series Black Mirror, you may be familiar with the episode called Nosedive. And if you have not seen that episode, I highly recommend that you do, because it is a brilliant example of a very possible near-term future involving social credit systems. And the episode's pretty interesting, and I won't go into it. I'll just say that it's very very illustrative and very near term. We're not far away from that. China is actually experimenting with social credit systems, and basically what these systems are is a way. It's kind of like an alternate currency, and it's a way to control behavior. So in the ideal social credit system, you're rewarded with points for being nice or considerate or productive or things that your society benefit. Okay, and if you don't behave the way you are expected to behave, you will lose points. And if you don't have enough points, you might not be able to get a certain job or go to a certain school or get the best health care or get a date from someone. There's all kinds of implications around social credit systems, which is one reason that the Europeans banned the use of social credit systems. Now, they're democratic. Now, China has no problem with it. It seems like they're kind of experimenting with that system right now, and so we're going to see what happens. I hope to God we don't start playing with those types of things in the United States, but we're just going to have to wait and see. Another risk is the cognitive impacts that this technology is already starting to show on us right now, and that is the Flynn effect. Some of you may or may not know the Flynn effect is the idea that over the long course of generations, children tend to have slightly higher IQs in every generation. They tend to get a little bit smarter, and that's there's a lot of theories as to why that might be, but generally kids have been learning. If you look at the curriculum of, say, a freshman in high school now versus a freshman in high school maybe 40, 50 years ago, like when I was in school, it would be very different. It would be much more intense for the current freshmen than it would be for the ones that were, in the past. So, but however, we are starting to see, I think in the last 10 years, we've seen a reversal of that effect, that IQ has been falling. And there's all kinds of theories as to why that is, but I have a reference to the paper that was written by Oakley and her colleagues that just recently came out in May around this, and it's fascinating, and how they propose we mitigate that bad trend, if you will. Social media impacts our teens profoundly. As if you are a parent of a teen, I highly recommend the book The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt, who's a brilliant sociologist, wrote The Righteous Mind in 2012, which is, I think, the definitive work that describes the differences between conservatives and liberals in terms of their mindsets and how they think. But the Anxious Generation is one his most current work, and it documents some very, very disturbing trends in terms of how social media has impacted teens, both teen boys and teen girls. One of the one of the spoilers I'm going to give you is that it damages teenage girls worse than it does boys, although it damages both, but not equally. It's a little bit harsher on teen girls for a number of reasons, which he talks about in the book. And not just psychologically, they're starting to see physical damage in the brain as a result of the impacts that social media algorithms have had on our kids. So if you have teenagers, I highly recommend you check out that book. The application of human vices and societal problems is very much at risk. The Rohingya genocide in Myanmar in 2016, 17-ish, there is a, I think Facebook basically contributed to that genocide. Now, how much you think they contributed to it is open to debate, but it is not zero, and it is very real. Their algorithms promoted content that made an already very bad situation in Myanmar much, much worse, and more than likely caused thousands of people to die needlessly. And just recently, like last week, I read about Meta suing this company called Crush AI. And I didn't even know what Crush AI was until I read this piece. But basically, it's a generative AI application where you give that application a picture of someone, and it will create a picture of that person without their clothes on. How wonderful is that? So these are the types of things. Not only that, it's gonna amplify things like inequality and all kinds of effects that we're not necessarily going to like. So this is another thing to be aware of. The AI is going to amplify a lot of good things, and it's going to amplify a lot of bad things. So be ready. It's an amplifier is kind of the takeaway from all this. Last couple bullet points are a little more subtle, but the idea that democracy is a conversation. The public conversation needed for a healthy democracy must be among humans. When AI bots are injected into the public discourse, especially if they're not disclosed, it's going to warp and distort that necessary communication that's going to help us, be healthy in our debates around issues and how we move forward in a productive sense, and instead of just wanting to kill each other because we don't see things eye to eye. And of course, autonomous weapon systems, that's a pretty obvious one as well. So I would contend that AI needs a leash and not guardrails. You probably heard some authors write about the need for guardrails for AI. And I would say the guardrails work if you have a very limited problem that you understand really well. If you know how AI could go off the rails in every conceivable form, then guardrails are fine. Then you can prevent those things from happening. Unfortunately, most things are more complicated than even we realize up front. And AI will exploit some paths that we never even thought of. So because of that ability, that capability, AI needs a leash, if you will, metaphorically. It needs to be overseen by humans in order to assure that it doesn't go off the rails and do more damage than we might expect. So the last section is regulation, mitigation, and preparation. And Aaron is going to talk a little bit more about this. But so some things have happened. The Take It Down Act, which was passed in May of this year, was actually one of the rare instances of bipartisanship on Capitol Hill these days. There wasn't even a floor vote. Basically, there's a procedure in the Senate that if it's pretty obvious that all the senators are going to vote for it, they basically say anybody oppose it. If nobody opposes it, it passes. So there wasn't even a floor vote on it. It's a start. It doesn't actually it doesn't cover a lot. It doesn't cover anything beyond the idea that if an ex-boyfriend or girlfriend posts content that you don't approve of or didn't consent to, there could be serious penalties for that. And if children are involved, the penalties are even more severe. So, it's a start. And I applaud that there's at least a start, but there's a whole lot more that needs to be done. Even Colorado focuses, their AI law just came out a few months ago. And the fact that there were the advocates for safety and the entrepreneurs that were working in AI both were unhappy with the bill probably tells me that legislators struck a reasonable balance at this point in time. But it only addresses algorithmic biases in 8 consequential areas. Like getting a job or getting a spot in a university or things like that. So it's very limited, but at least it's a start. There's a proposed 10-year moratorium for any state level AI regulation in the current budget bill that's on Capitol Hill. And thank goodness that even some Republicans are seeing that this is a very dangerous proposal. 10 years in this field is like 100 years somewhere else. So me personally, and I think a lot of people that really understand what's going on here, would be very much against this idea of this moratorium. I think it's incredibly dangerous and irresponsible, but we'll see how it plays out. One of the things that my wife and I do to mitigate the possible dangers of AI is that we have a code word that only we know. So if I suspect in a moment that I might not be talking to my wife or a loved one, I'll ask for the code word, and the AI is not going to know how to spit that out. And that's only one layer of defense, but at least it's something. It's unfortunately what we have to start thinking about right now. So, along the same lines, we need to stay curious and engaged and get help from people like Aaron and other knowledgeable folks that have worked with this stuff in order to mitigate this landscape. Okay, now we've come to the end, and let's just summarize. We've covered an awful lot of ground in the last 35 minutes or so. So let's just review quickly what we've gone through, so that your brain has some things to hold on to here. So the big players, their number one priority is developing capability as fast as possible, because as we mentioned before, we are in it's an AI gold rush, and it's actually survival. So we've got 2 big carrots and sticks working to drive this technology. Unfortunately, the big players are focused mostly on getting the technology developed. Now, that's not to say that they don't understand safety. They do. To be fair, safety is important, but it's not their primary goal, unfortunately. Just go back to that Sam Altman quote that I talked about at the beginning in part 1. So AI alignment, as we talked about too, minimizes unintended consequences. All right, and it aligns a mismatch between machine goals and human values. All right, but here's the problem: humans don't have a common set of values. I mean, look at the Israelis and Palestinians. Look at the Russians and the Ukrainians. Look at Democrats and Republicans. We have a problem, Houston, and AI isn't going to solve it. It's going to actually force us to think more creatively about problems we've had forever as a species, if you will. The next item is information is not truth. Information is truth and fiction, and truth is a narrow slice of it. The naive view of information is that more is better. That's dangerous and wrong, because more information can make things worse. And there's millions of examples of that. Fiction is cheap and often easy, and truth is expensive and painful. Stable societies need the right balance of both. Consciousness is not intelligence. Consciousness is the ability to feel. Intelligence is the capability to take action and achieve goals. Okay, humans have both consciousness and intelligence, and humans are more story-driven than truth-driven, and that's an important idea to remember too, in terms of how we create stable societies. AI agents so far are only intelligent. So AI brings the power to greatly amplify many areas of human endeavor, both good and bad. So what we need to be asking ourselves is what will we amplify? For example, if a business is just interested in amplifying profits, or selling more stuff, I still read lots and lots of job postings. And I'm like, I don't want my work to amplify that, just that. If it's human well-being, if it's something that really is going to benefit people, I get excited about that. But what are we going to amplify? It shouldn't be just about a really short-term, narrow focus. We got to be very careful because we're playing with literally dynamite, on a grand scale. So a lot can go wrong, and a lot has already gone wrong. We talked about the social media impact on teens, the Rohingya massacre in Myanmar, and we talked about that TaskRabbit experiment where AI actually sought to accrue power to itself by lying to a TaskRabbit support person to get access. Okay, the current proposed 10-year moratorium on state-level regulation, I believe, and many others believe, is extremely dangerous. I would encourage you, if you feel the same, to write your congressperson and say, look, I live in Colorado, okay? Most people watching this are probably from Colorado, and the Republicans have the majority in both the House and Senate. However, senators and representatives do have some sway with their colleagues in terms of tweaking current legislation. It's probably going to get passed along party lines, but they can at least exert some pressure on their colleagues and say, hey, look, guys, this portion of the bill is really, really disastrous and dangerous. So they can exert some pressure there. So, I wrap up by saying, stay prepared, talk to friends, come to meetings like this. It was great to see the turnout that we had at our Monday AI for Everyone meeting here in Fort Collins. Ask for help from knowledgeable people. Have a secret code word. I'm not going to go too much more than that. And here's some recommended reading for you. Weapons of Math Destruction was written by Kathy O'Neill in 2016. And when I read that, I just knew that I was on the right path in terms of going into data science. It came out about a year after I had started my pivot, and it couldn't have been more timely. Really loved the work. She did a wonderful job. Here we are 9 years later, and we're just now starting to address what she had so eloquently stated 9 years ago. We're late, but at least it's a start. The Alignment Problem by Brian Christian is a really awesome read. It's not an easy read, but it is accessible. You don't need to be a computer scientist to understand what he's talking about. It helps if you are. If you have some exposure to computer science, machine learning, things like that, this book will really be an enlightening book for you. But if you don't have that background, it's still an incredibly easy to understand book. You'll just have to work at it a little harder, but it's wonderful. And best of all of these four that I have here is Yuval Noah Harari's Nexus. He is the best-selling author of Sapiens, which many of you may have heard of. But this book is about information networks from the Stone Age to the AI, and it is brilliant. I'm probably working on my third pass through that book because it is so good. It really he's one of the real polymaths of our time. He's just a brilliant man, and he's one of my intellectual heroes. One of his prior works was called Homo Deus, which is what he wrote, the book he wrote after Sapiens, which really got me spinning around a lot of this stuff. And he predicted a lot of things that seemed at the time to be way in the distant future. And I think he's even been surprised that since he came out with Homo Deus in 2016, the same year O'Neill came out with her book, from YouTube's I've seen of him in conversation with other hosts, even he was surprised that we've progressed this quickly. He did not expect a lot of what he was talking about at the time to manifest itself so quickly. But these are some recommendations. I have some appendices here that you might find interesting or entertaining. But besides that, I'm going to add my references, which document all of the stuff I've been talking about, and goes into much more depth if you so wish to explore. Thanks for listening. I appreciate your time, and the best wishes to all.